The city pulsed beneath a quilt of rain and neon. Reflections shimmered along glass panels, turning steel towers into glistening veins of color and data. People moved like rivulets of code through the concrete arteries, busy, indifferent, connected by 1,000 unseen currents. And above them all, unnoticed, Elira watched. Perched atop a maglev rail beam, she crouched like a statue carved of shadow and gold. Her armor whispered with the ambient electricity, absorbing the city's frequencies, her body barely tangible to this dimension. The crown across her brow glowed faintly, reactive to her neural patterns, and her eyes scanned the movement below with a quiet precision honed through centuries of genetic refinement. She was not meant to be here. Not like this. Observation only, no contact, no interference. But Elira had always been a little too curious. It began with the music. That was the first anomaly. The first crack in her emotional insulation. The humans, so fragile and chaotic, poured meaning into sound, wove sorrow, defiance, love into vibrations. She found herself drifting closer each night, drawn to street performers, tiny bars, holographic concerts. Something about their voices, untamed and imperfect, tugged at her. There was no logic to their arrangements, no algorithm dictating rhythm or tone. Yet it moved her in ways her training had never accounted for. She had spent years among them, slipping through cracks in perception, recording their behaviors, filing emotion like data. They were meant to be watched, not known. Certainly not felt. But that line had started to blur. The rain softened into a mist, and Elira leapt soundlessly from the rail, dissolving into a distortion field mid-fall. Her boots kissed the pavement an inch from detection. She passed through the crowd like vapor, unseen, unrecorded. Most humans wouldn't know a fourth-dimensional ripple if it sliced across their cheek. Most but not all. 2 blocks over, Marcus Vale ran a simulation in his cramped flat above an antique electronics repair shop. His apartment was a haphazard shrine to outmoded tech. Wires coiled like ivy, shelves bowed under ancient consoles, oscilloscopes blinking like sleepy eyes. The floor was a mosaic of microchips, pizza boxes, and tangled dreams. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck as a 3D schematic spun above his desk, rotating in low orbit around a holographic cursor. He had been tracking the energy anomalies for 8 weeks now, and each day brought him closer to something real. Not just data spikes. Patterns. They always coincided with dense human gatherings, protests, festivals, disasters. Places where emotions flared and converged like storm systems. But the disturbances weren't random. Someone, or something, was watching. He hadn't told anyone. The last time he'd pitched an idea like this, he'd been laughed out of his university's applied AI program. Pareidolia, they called it. Seeing meaning where there was none. Marcus preferred a different term, possibility. As his simulation looped again, a new marker flashed red, just 3 blocks away. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Elira stopped abruptly near the plaza fountain. A child had wandered from the crowd, her tiny frame now dangerously close to the auto-cleaning drones that swept the pavement with merciless efficiency. Elira hesitated. She knew the rules. She had watched people die before. Observation meant non-interference. The drone's sweeper arms extended, its sensors blind to the child's presence. Elira stepped forward, phasing in just long enough to move the girl a few meters to the side. It was barely a moment. A flicker in the air. But someone saw it. Marcus had been sprinting toward the signal when he caught the blur. Not a shadow. Not a glitch. A form. Humanoid. Golden light like refracted sunlight and a shimmer of something ethereal. He froze, chest heaving. And then she was gone. He stood alone by the fountain, soaked to the skin, scanning the crowd. No one else reacted. No one else saw. But he had. That night, he didn't sleep. He reviewed the frame-by-frame footage from his portable scanner, enhancing every pixel, filtering every band. A strand of hair. A glint of metal. He stared at it for hours. Elira sat cross-legged in the skyhook platform above the city, arms wrapped around herself. She had never been this exposed. Her chest still burned with the echo of adrenaline, a human word, but an accurate one. her report to the collective would be delicate. She hadn't broken protocol, not really. The child never saw her. Still, the encounter had rattled her. And what was worse, in those 2 seconds of corporeal contact, she had felt seen. Not by the child. By someone else. She accessed the local surveillance nodes remotely, tracing the energy pulse her partial materialization had left behind. That's when she saw him. Frame 337. A human male. Pale-skinned, damp-haired, staring directly at where she had stood. Her heart slowed. She should erase him. Bury the footage. Alert the oversight matrix. But she didn't. She isolated the frame and magnified it. His eyes were wide with wonder. Not fear. Not aggression. He saw me. Marcus spent the next week in obsessive motion. He built a spectral triangulation rig using cannibalized parts from old quantum receivers and a kitchen blender. Every time he ran a test, the same spectral residue returned. The anomaly was intelligent, conscious, predictive. It avoided him, but it knew he was trying to find it. He began to speak aloud when he worked. "I know you're out there," he murmured into the room, not entirely sure if he was joking. "You saved that kid. You weren't just watching." The sensors didn't respond. But one day, the screen flashed green for a second, then went dark. He leaned back, startled. It was as if someone had winked. Elira stood outside his window that night, her presence cloaked in microdistortion, observing. The human had built detection tools with junk. Crude but elegant. She admired the tenacity. She also feared what it meant. There was something about him that unsettled her. He didn't seek to control or exploit. He sought to understand. And she wanted to know why. The following evening, Marcus found a small cube on his window ledge. No signature. No traceable energy source. Just a single phrase projected when activated, "Why do you see what others don't?" He stared at it, breath caught somewhere between excitement and disbelief. "I could ask you the same thing," he whispered. High above, in the folds of dimensions no human eyes could follow, Elira watched and waited. She knew this was the edge of something she couldn't return from. Curiosity had become connection. Data had become meaning. For the first time in her long, purpose-bound existence, she felt something dangerously close to longing. And she wasn't entirely sure whose it was, his or hers. The cube sat in Marcus's palm, cool and impossibly light. It had no seams, no circuitry he could detect. It simply was as if it had always existed, waiting for someone curious enough to deserve it. He turned it over, hoping for some mechanical clue, but the surface resisted scrutiny like water refusing to be held. When he tapped it again, the phrase reappeared. "Why do you see what others don't?" He didn't know how to answer. Not yet. The next few days were quiet, unnervingly so. The usual anomalies, sensor fluctuations, phantom energy echoes, ceased. No new signals. No shimmering figures at the edges of his vision. It was as though she'd retracted completely, leaving behind only the cube and a hollow space in his chest that shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. But then, Marcus had always been drawn to the impossible. At night, he talked to the cube like a fool. He told it about his failed experiments, about growing up a lonely, hyper-focused kid who saw patterns in things no one else noticed. About his mother, who believed he could hear the hum of the universe, and encouraged him, until the cancer took her. He talked about how he'd spent years trying to prove that reality had seams that could be picked apart and rewoven, even if it meant being laughed at. Maybe especially because of that. He didn't expect a response. Until one evening, just as he was preparing for bed, the cube pulsed faintly and a voice, not synthetic, not mechanical, floated out like breath. "You were always meant to see." Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of old radios. "Jesus," he muttered, heart hammering. "You're real." He looked up. There was someone in his room. She stood at the edge of the shadows, her form wavering like heat over asphalt. Tall, armored, ethereal. Her hair floated as if underwater, and her eyes, those impossibly bright, curious eyes, locked onto his like twin suns caught mid-flare. "I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice more thought than sound. Marcus could barely breathe. "But you are." "I don't know why I came." I think you do. Elira stepped forward, and for the first time in centuries, she allowed herself to remain visible for longer than a blink. Her technology whispered in protest. Warnings blared through her implants, but she muted them. This was a different kind of threat, one no training could prepare her for. You should forget me, she said. Forget what you've seen. Too late. She studied him. His aura was unshielded, raw. Humans didn't filter themselves. They bled emotion like ink in water. You're not afraid. I am, he admitted. But not of you. Then of what? Of what it means if I'm right. That startled her. Meaning, if you're here, if you exist, then everything we think we know about life, the universe, all of it, it changes. That's terrifying. But it's also the most exciting thing I've ever known. She could see it in him. Not worship, not greed. Just wonder. Unfiltered, sincere. I was meant to observe, she said softly. Catalog. Report. You weren't supposed to see me. Then why did I? I don't know, she said, and that frightened her more than anything. Perhaps because you looked. They sat in silence for a long moment. The hum of the city outside became a distant tide. Then, without another word, Elira vanished. But the silence didn't last. The next day, Marcus's systems were attacked. Subtle at first, data anomalies, corrupted files. Then more aggressive, hard drive failures, power surges, surveillance drones hovering just a little too long near his windows. Someone or something knew he'd made contact. He was being watched. Elira felt it too. Her people had noticed the breach. She had lingered too long in the visible spectrum, interacted too deeply. The fact that Marcus was still alive meant they hadn't decided to erase the encounter, yet. But that window was shrinking. Her neural uplink pulsed with a directive. Return immediately. Stand down from terrestrial observation. She ignored it. Instead, she returned to Marcus's apartment the next night. You're in danger, she said, bypassing pleasantries. Yeah, he replied, gesturing toward a pile of fried equipment. I got that part. They'll come for you if they decide you're a contaminant. Contaminant, he repeated, tasting the word. Nice. Makes me feel special. This isn't a joke. I'm not laughing. He stood, meeting her gaze. But I'm not backing down either. You came here for a reason. You could have erased me. But you didn't. I should have. But you didn't. She turned away, frustrated by the truth of it. She had broken more than protocol. She had ruptured the clean detachment her people required. There was a flaw in her now. A human flaw. I don't want to lose you, she said before she could stop herself. Marcus blinked. You don't even know me. But I do, she whispered. I've watched your world for years. I've seen people scream, cry, hope. I didn't understand any of it. But you look back. You saw me. The cube pulsed again, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Then stay, he said quietly. Let's figure this out. Together. But she shook her head. I can't. They're coming. I've delayed too much already. He stepped closer. Then let me help you. Elira hesitated. You don't know what that means. I don't care. I do. Her voice cracked. Different, Marcus. You're dangerous to them. And to me. And yet she didn't leave. Not right away. They stood there, two anomalies caught between worlds, each seeing in the other something rare, possibility. The breach was no longer a matter of if, but when. Back in her dimensional relay point, Elira intercepted the conversation between two overseers. They discussed containment, final protocols, termination of exposure vectors. She was listed as compromised. Marcus as an exposure risk. Her decision crystallized. She sent a single pulse to Marcus's personal network, a location code, encrypted in a frequency only he could receive. He arrived hours later, breathless, clutching the cube like a beacon. She was waiting in the clearing of a decommissioned city zone, far from cameras and drones. The air shimmered around her as she dropped the last of her cloaking matrix. I'm leaving, she said simply. But I'm not going back. Then where will you go? I don't know. Somewhere they won't find me. A crack between dimensions. A place I don't exist. He looked at her, the gravity of her choice sinking in. You're cutting yourself off. Forever. They won't allow a defector. I'll be hunted. But if I stay, you'll die. His throat tightened. We just met. I know. He stepped closer. Then let's not say goodbye. I wasn't planning to. Without another word, she reached out and touched his temple. A flicker of light passed between them. Data, sensation, memory. He gasped as the flood of alien knowledge passed through him like lightning wrapped in silk. This is part of me, she said. So I'll always know where to find myself. Then she was gone. He stood alone in the clearing, cube pulsing in his hand, the air still humming with her echo. Above, far above, watchers turned their gaze toward Earth. Toward the anomaly. And the human who saw too much. The game had changed. And they had just made their first mistake. They underestimated what a human would do when given a reason to believe. The pulse of the cube had not ceased since Elira vanished. It emitted a quiet frequency Marcus couldn't decode but felt deep in his chest, a constant whisper threading through his veins. Days passed, then a week, yet he couldn't stop pacing, couldn't stop testing signals, sweeping the skies with makeshift antennae strung across the roof like spider silk. She was out there. He could feel her. But there was something else too, something pressing closer, circling like wolves outside firelight. He no longer operated out of his apartment. Too many prying eyes. Too much electromagnetic noise. Instead, he'd moved his operation to an abandoned communications array outside the city, decaying concrete, rusted steel, and ancient satellite dishes now repurposed for decoding the undetectable. The cube had begun forming symbols now, glyphs that floated in 3 dimensions when he focused his thoughts. They were a language, he was certain, one that shifted depending on emotion. Elira's imprint was inside it. When he concentrated hard enough, he could feel her panic, her longing, her fear. He wasn't supposed to survive this long. That much was clear. And then came the signal. It arrived not as noise, but silence. A perfect vacuum carved into the data stream he monitored. It erased everything else around it, a void shaped like a message. When Marcus isolated the pulse, decoded the sequence, and rendered it as audio, he heard one word spoken in her voice. No coordinates. No explanation. Just urgency, pressed into a single syllable. He didn't question it. He packed what he could into a duffel, strapped the cube to his chest using an old climbing harness, and vanished into the wilderness beyond the abandoned tower, where old roads cracked like dry riverbeds and the trees listened without judgment. As he moved deeper into the forgotten parts of the world, the pulse grew stronger. Not just from the cube, in him. As if her gift had rewired his perception. He saw flickers in the sky, currents in the air. Reality was fraying, the seams pulling apart like worn thread. And something was coming through. In orbit, the Watchers descended. Not ships in the human sense. No hulls or engines. They were configurations of probability, shifting forms made from condensed logic and purpose. To the human eye, they might appear as lightning given shape, storm fronts with minds of their own. One touched down near the city where Marcus had lived. It scanned, searching for anomalies. It found echoes of Elira's presence. It found human data trails tied too tightly to interference zones. It found Marcus. But Marcus was no longer where he had been. He was standing in a field at the edge of an old national forest, staring at a shimmering fracture in space, a tear that looked like glass submerged in oil. The air around it throbbed, and he felt his skin tighten, as though pressure itself was judging him. He reached out without thinking. The cube pulsed once, and the tear rippled open. On the other side, chaos. Not fire and death, but movement without gravity, sound without vibration. Dimensions folded and unfurled like pages in a book being flipped too fast. Somewhere within it, he felt her, faint, fragmented. Marcus. The voice was faint, but real. He stepped through. The transition wasn't painful, but it broke all his senses. His eyes saw sound. His skin tasted light. His thoughts were no longer linear. Yet somehow, at the center of that hurricane, Elira stood, frayed, flickering but whole. You shouldn't have come, she said, reaching for him, her form trembling. Too late, he replied, grasping her wrist. You called me. I warned you. You needed me. That silenced her. Behind them, the dimension groaned. Shapes moved at the periphery, watchers or something worse. They were not bound by time. They existed as enforcement protocols made manifest, sent to erase anomalies. And they had found them both. We can't stay here, Elira said. But we can't go back either, Marcus countered. There's one place left, she whispered, one fold I never reported. I hid it even from the collective. But getting there means we have to pass through the forge. What's that? Where ideas go to burn or become gods. He didn't understand, but she didn't wait for permission. She pulled him forward, and the cube obeyed. It extended in every direction, forming a cocoon around them, a ship made of memory and intent. They flew, not through space but through thought. Marcus saw everything he had ever feared and loved flash before him. His mother's laugh. His first failed experiment. Elira, standing in the ruins of a dying world, offering her hand. The forge awaited them. It was not a place. It was a trial. It tested them separately. Marcus stood in a chamber of infinite mirrors. Each reflected a version of him. A scientist, a coward, a conqueror, a father, a corpse. They asked him one question. Why did you look when you were told not to? He answered, because not looking felt like a worse kind of death. The mirrors shattered. Elira found herself in a garden of her lost people, memories reconstructed. Her commander stood before her, asking, "Why did you break protocol?" She answered, "Because for the first time, I felt something that mattered more." The garden burned. They reunited at the center of the forge. The Watchers arrived too late. The forge had made its choice. Marcus and Elira emerged transformed, not as gods, not as weapons, but as bridges. They stood between species, between realities. And behind them, the path they took began to open. The first humans saw it the next day, a shimmer in the sky that didn't belong, a sound like a heartbeat at the edge of hearing, messages buried in static, whispering of possibilities. Marcus and Elira stood on the threshold of a new existence, hands clasped, the cube dormant at last. But this was not the end. It was the first page of a book no one knew existed, now being written in real time. And the Watchers were not the only ones who had been watching.